ships take center stage. By now, Operation Dynamo was moving. The order had been given. The evacuation from Dunkirk had begun. Across the Channel, men were waiting on beaches, on roads, near the harbour, and around the town. Behind them was the advancing German army. Above them was danger from the air. Ahead of them was the sea. And across that sea, on the English side, harbours like Ramsgate were becoming part of the rescue. Not as scenery. Not as background. But as working places in a national emergency. The rescue needed large ships. It needed destroyers. It needed merchant vessels. It needed naval command. It needed the East Mole at Dunkirk. But it also needed something smaller. Something that could move where deeper ships could not. Something that could come close to the beaches. Something that could act quickly in shallow water. It needed small boats. That is where the little ships entered the story. The name sounds gentle. Almost affectionate. Little ships. But there was nothing gentle about what they were being asked to do. These were not all warships. Many were ordinary vessels from ordinary lives. Pleasure cruisers. Fishing boats. Motor launches. Lifeboats. River craft. Sailing barges. Workboats. Boats built for weekends, for rivers, for fishing grounds, for local trade, for harbour work. And suddenly, they were being drawn into one of the most dangerous operations of the Second World War. Some crossed with their owners. Some were taken over and crewed by naval personnel. Some were handled by men who knew every sound their vessel made. Some were handled by men who had to learn fast. There was no single little ship story. There were hundreds of them. And that is what makes the story so powerful. It was not one heroic boat. It was many. Different shapes. Different engines. Different crews. Different risks. All pulled towards the same purpose. If you are just joining us, this is Royal Harbour Live. You are looking out across Ramsgate Royal Harbour. And you are listening to the story of the little ships, the small vessels that helped connect the beaches of Dunkirk with the larger ships waiting offshore. To understand why they mattered, picture the problem. The beaches at Dunkirk were wide and shallow. At low tide, the water pulled far away from the sand. Large ships could not simply come in and collect men like passengers at a pier. They would run aground. They would be exposed. They would be targets. So the men waited. Some stood in long lines. Some waded into the water. Some tried to reach boats under fire, and the small craft became a bridge. Not a bridge of stone. Not a bridge of steel. A moving bridge. A bridge made of hulls, engines, oars, ropes, courage, and timing. The little ships could move closer to the beach. They could take men off in smaller groups. They could ferry them out to larger vessels. And sometimes, they could carry men all the way back across the channel. That does not mean they did everything. They did not. The rescue depended heavily on larger naval and merchant vessels. The East Mole carried a huge part of the evacuation. But without the smaller boats, the shallow beaches would have been even more difficult. The little ships filled the gap. And sometimes, history turns on gaps. The gap between the beach and the ship. The gap between defeat and survival. The gap between being trapped and being brought home. That was the space the little ships entered. Imagine one of those vessels leaving the English coast. Perhaps from a harbour like this. Perhaps from another port. The crew knows the sea. But this is not an ordinary crossing. There is no pleasure in it. No holiday purpose. No calm destination. They are heading towards smoke. Towards noise. Towards a coastline under attack. The channel itself is not a small thing. Even in good weather, it demands respect. In wartime, it became something harsher. There were mines. There was aircraft attack. There was shellfire near the beaches. There was confusion. There was fatigue. There was the constant fear that a small vessel might not return. And yet they went. That is the heart of the little ship's story. Not that they were large. Not that they were powerful. But that they went. There is a kind of courage that looks grand from a distance. Flags. Uniforms. Ceremony. Music. But there is another kind of courage that looks like a small boat pointing its bow towards danger. That is what we are remembering. Across the water at Dunkirk, the men waiting to be rescued would have seen all kinds of vessels approaching. Some large. Some small. Some official-looking. Some almost unbelievable in that setting. Imagine standing on the beach. You are tired. You have been retreating. You do not know if the next attack is coming. You look out and see boats approaching. Not enough. Never enough. But something. Something moving towards you instead of away. For a man on that beach, a small boat did not look small. It looked like a chance. One trip. One place aboard. One more step towards home. The work was repetitive. Dangerous. Physically exhausting. Load men. Move out. Transfer them. Return. Load again. Move again. Return again. Some boats became overloaded. Some were damaged, some had engines fail. Some had to be abandoned. Some were lost. But the work continued. And here is something important. The story of the little ships is not just a story of vessels. It is a story of usefulness. A boat that had been used for leisure became useful. A harbour that had been built over centuries became useful. Local knowledge became useful. Seamanship became useful. Calm judgment became useful. In a crisis, usefulness becomes heroic. If you are watching the harbour now, you may see yachts, fishing boats, workboats, and marina lights. Most days, they are part of ordinary coastal life. But the story of Dunkirk asks us to imagine ordinary coastal life being suddenly called into something extraordinary. That is why this story still grips people. Because it suggests that history is not only made by governments and generals. Sometimes history reaches into ordinary places. A harbour. A boatyard. A marina. A fishing community. A riverside mooring. And it says, you are needed. Ramsgate understood that. This harbour had already known storms. It had known military movement. It had known naval work. It had known the practical demands of the sea. So when the evacuation demanded small boats and organization, Ramsgate was not starting from nothing. It had the shape of a place that could respond. And the response mattered. 42,000 men landed here at Ramsgate during Operation Dynamo. Think of the harbour receiving them. Not one dramatic arrival. But wave after wave. Men coming ashore. Some silent. Some dazed. Some relieved. Some injured. Some barely able to take in what had happened. Behind each number was a face. Behind each face, a life. A family. A fear. A future that might have ended on a beach in France. The little ships helped bring those futures back within reach. If you're just joining us, this is Royal Harbour Live in Ramsgate. You are listening to part 3 of our little ship's story. We have reached the moment where ordinary vessels become part of an extraordinary rescue. There is a phrase people often use about Dunkirk. The miracle of Dunkirk. It is understandable. The final number rescued was far beyond early expectations. But when we use the word miracle, we should be careful not to make the human effort disappear. Because men planned this. Men sailed this. Men loaded the vessels. Men repaired engines. Men signaled. Men waited. Men returned. Women and civilians helped receive, feed, clothe, and care for those who came back. If it was a miracle, it was a miracle made of work. And the little ships were part of that work. Day after day, the evacuation grew. More ships. More small boats. More crossings. More men lifted from danger. The operation did not become safe. It became possible. That is the difference. And sometimes possible is enough. At Dunkirk, the small boats were used to move men from the beaches to larger ships offshore. Some made direct crossings. Others worked as ferries between sand and ship. Some were used again and again until they could do no more. They were small enough to reach places others could not. But being small also made them vulnerable. A small boat under aircraft attack has little protection. A small boat in rough water has little margin for error. A small boat overloaded with soldiers has little room for mistakes. Yet the crews kept working. There must have been moments when the noise was overwhelming. Engines. Aircraft. Shells. Shouted orders. Water against hulls. Men calling out. Metal striking wood. The confusion of many vessels trying to do urgent work in dangerous conditions. And still, through that confusion, the evacuation continued. This is one reason the little ships became symbols. They represent more than transport. They represent the moment when the scale of the crisis forced every available thing into service. Not perfect vessels. Available vessels. Not ideal conditions. Actual conditions. Not certainty. Resolve. Look again at the harbour. The shape of it. The piers. The water. The moorings. The working edges. This is the sort of place that helps us understand the little ships. Because a harbour teaches patience. It teaches weather. It teaches maintenance. It teaches that small details matter. A rope. A tide. An engine note. A mooring line. A decision made quickly. In wartime, those small details could become the difference between life and death. As the evacuation continued, Britain began to understand that something remarkable was happening. At first, the fear had been that only a small portion of the army might be saved. Then the numbers grew. Tens of thousands. Then more. Then more again. But for the men involved, it was never just a number. It was a crossing. A landing. A cup of tea. A blanket. A train. A message home. For many, Ramsgate was part of that first return to safety. Imagine arriving here after Dunkirk. The English coast beneath your feet again. The harbour around you. People helping. The war not over. Not even close. But for that moment, you were back. That is why remembrance matters. Not because the past is pretty, but because it was costly. In May 2026, when the little ships gather again in Ramsgate Royal Harbour, people will come to look at them. They will take photographs. They will admire the polished wood. The lines of the hulls. The flags. The history. But the deeper question is this: what did these boats once mean to the men who saw them coming? To us, they may look charming. To the men at Dunkirk, they may have looked like life. That is the bridge we need to cross in memory. From display to meaning. From event to understanding. From harbour view to human story. And that is what Royal Harbour Live can do. It can let people watch the harbour not just as a place of beauty, but as a place of memory. If you are watching from outside Ramsgate, this view is your connection. If you are local, this is your town's story. If you are visiting for the Little Ships weekend, this is your invitation to look deeper. The little ships did not act alone. But they gave the evacuation one of its most enduring images. Small boats moving towards danger. Small boats bringing